Greetings. I'm Thomas Caldwell of the Aurelian Column, and this is the Book Report. It's traditional that on Halloween, the American way of celebrating what was traditionally the Celtic Day of the Dead, it's traditional that we read something scary, either for other people or kids especially, or to ourselves. H.P. Lovecraft is my favorite in that particular genre, but I've read him for years, and he's a little too early 20th century to be really scary these days. So I sat down with a nice book about the delightful topic of nuclear war. The book I'm speaking of is Nuclear War, a Scenario. The author is Annie Jacobsen, and it was published in March of this year, 2024. This is a very timely book, especially given how people are talking so casually about the use of nuclear weapons. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, you're listening to someone who thinks that nuclear weapons should not exist, should never be used, that humans are too stupid to possess them, and has had the dubious distinction of knowing people some years ago who survived the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and actually having a friend who was a child at the time. So I have a bit of a prejudice about these things, and I openly admit it. And I think anybody who thinks they're good ideas or were ever a good idea should look into them a little bit. Any human being that goes to the museum in Hiroshima and sees what these things did can't walk out the exit the same person. If you do, well, you should see a professional. Anyways, Ms. Jacobsen has taken a subject which often can be quite dry or overdramatic and wove it into a scenario, a possible story, a possible way that nuclear war would be waged during an afternoon in spring. But what she did was she took the story and she interwove it with interviews that she did with people who knew what they were talking about, people who've been in the defense establishment, the political establishment, people who've worked on these things. She was able to do an amazing amount of research on what has been declassified. There's still a lot, of course, that is top secret about that. And even though I consider myself a little bit of an expert on this topic, I learned a lot of things which, made me even more angry that they exist than usual. For example, in the late 1960s, the arsenal between the United States, Russia, and I assume China totaled nearly 70,000 warheads. 70,000. That's a 7 with 4 zeros after it. Yes, that many. And they were in the megaton range, many of them, or most of them. Whoever thought that was a good idea on any side should have been lobotomized, tossed into a dungeon full of rats and cockroaches, and denied all food and water until they left this world. There's a lot here that she revealed that was quite fascinating, but it's also terrifying. I'm not going to go into all the details of the scenario. The only criticism I have is that North Korea plays a pivotal role in this in a way I don't think would really happen myself, because I lived in the Far East for nearly 30 years. I have had some interaction with North Koreans and almost made it there on a trip once, but that didn't work out. The other thing, too, is any scenario involving North Korea would also probably involve Japan. However, the way things spin out of control and how quickly they do is, I think, very, very well thought out. Now, one of the things that you hear people talk about when you talk about the football, you talk about nuclear launch codes, is who you want in the White House, who will be in charge. Well, given this is a political year, and given this is a highly politicized presidential election currently going on, and my views on the candidates are quite well known, I can't imagine Ms. Harris having anything but a total nervous breakdown. But then again, You don't want anyone involved in this sort of scenario. Because if Donald Trump is told you have 6 or 10 minutes to make a decision on whether or not the planet Earth is to be destroyed, nobody should be in that position. Nobody should have that responsibility. Nobody. What you want is someone in power who will do everything in their ability to prevent such a scenario and to eventually eliminate these devices from the human equation. I believe it was John F. Kennedy who was asked once during some military exercises at sea, Mr. President, with all these weapons and ships and planes and missiles, what do you do with this stuff? And he looked at this journalist and said, if you are absolutely smart and absolutely clever, and I'm paraphrasing what he said, if you're really smart, you're really clever, absolutely nothing. And that's the way it should go. We have people who are commanding our armed forces who've never been in war. And that's something that I never thought about. Yeah, we have. We have all these people who, some of them have been in the military. Nixon was in the military, but he'd never been in combat. Ronald Reagan was in the military, but he was involved with movie production. Donald Trump was in a military academy. Kamala Harris, well, she was in San Francisco. Well, you know what that's about. But we don't have anybody who's been in war making plans on how to prevent them. And I think that's something that we need to consider in the future. This is a book that is touching on something also, is that we haven't had any above-ground nuclear tests seen by anybody who's probably still alive, or very few. Nuclear tests went underground in the early 1960s. In fact, it's been debated whether or not we should have a test above ground somewhere and invite all the world's leaders to see it, so you say, yeah, these things are bad. This is a book that does an excellent job of taking a subject which is often too dry and too analytical and combining it with a narrative which is fairly believable. And that makes it interesting, and that makes it educational. I don't believe the human race would survive a nuclear war. I don't. Now, there is one thing else that I'm going to touch on, but I'm not going to spoil it. At the end of the book, I was extremely impressed with how Ms. Jacobson wove in a story which is something that Graham Hancock is very interested in. And I'm not going to say what it is. I want you to read it for yourself. The book is Nuclear War, a Scenario by Annie Jacobson. It's published by Dutton. You can get it in Kindle, Audible, paperback, and hardback. I'd get it in a hardback and I'd get it in a Kindle, and the audiobook is very, very good. And to her credit, she narrated the audiobook herself, and she did an excellent job. It's a scary story, but it's one that I think people really need to address intelligently, because there are too many people out there openly talking about nuclear weapons as if they're nothing, and they are far from that. That is it for today. If you appreciate these podcasts, my writings, my photography, and on occasion my poetry, please like and subscribe, and please consider a paid subscription. I do have a fundraiser going also for new equipment, which would enable me to handle things in the coming months and years a little bit better. I welcome feedback. You can reach me at feedback@aureliancolumn.com. That's feedback@aureliancolumn.com. I'm up on X. My handle there is MICCAMPEN. That's MICCAMPEN. You can also get me on the Substack channel this podcast originates on. That's aureliancolumn.substack.com. You can send me a direct note there. I'm up on Telegram, a few other places. I'm not on Facebook, and I would urge people to leave that pitiful excuse for a social media platform. Until we meet again, be good, be safe, be vigilant, and remember, Clown World must be destroyed. Good day.